You were trying to block federal agents or assist those who are.
I was trying to keep someone from getting
maybe if the person wasn't standing in front of, maybe if the person wasn't standing in front of federal agents, that wouldn't be a problem.
Progressive Kat Abughazaleh was a guest on MAGA host Leland Vittert's show on News Nation to talk about ICE, the occupation of Chicago and other cities, and Donald Trump's assault on immigrants in the United States. We're going to take a look at these clips of Leland Vittert and Kat Abughazaleh, also known as Kat Abu, having a heated debate about this topic of immigration. I'm going to share my thoughts on this as well. Let's check it out together.
The extreme right in this country refused to accept the results of the Civil War. They have repeatedly called for a rematch.
In the early days of the Nazi regime, they started slowly but surely taking away people's rights. And what we're seeing now is the very same thing.
Both J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Johnson could use a history lesson. They clearly do not understand it. This is where we are now in America in 2025. The political reality is this looming showdown. There's very little energy in America to soften immigration laws. So what you are seeing is coming mostly from the ultra-progressive elite parts of America, like Chicago. Bill O'Reilly's with us in a moment to discuss the politics. We begin, though, with Kat Abughazaleh. She's a congressional candidate in Illinois who's been an integral part of the protests outside that ICE facility near Chicago. Last month during a protest, we have some video of it, she was thrown to the ground by a federal agent. We're glad you're with us. Thank you. After the fall, are you okay?
Yeah, I had bruises up my entire right side and my hand was a bit jammed up, but I'm okay now.
Okay, good. We're glad to hear that. When the police chief said that you cannot attack federal agents, don't ram them with your cars, that sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I and pretty much every person out there has been extremely clear of nonviolent protests. I've never seen anyone at these protests that have been violent. But, you talked about history a second ago, Leland. You said that J.B. Pritzker and Brandon Johnson need a history lesson. I'd like to give you one. When masked men are deployed by an executive figure into our streets, when they are kidnapping people, entire families, naked, zip tying their hands and throwing them into U-Haul trucks, they're usually not the good guys. And in fact, it doesn't usually end well for anyone involved. I personally would call that the secret police.
Okay, well, you can call it whatever you want. As far as we understand it, ICE is following the law. You may not like the law,
but they are not.
But it is the yes.
They are not.
Yes,
Here's the thing, Leland. We just had a press conference this Friday where we demanded transparency, accountability, and safety. The transparency aspect.
You can demand whatever you want, Kat. You can demand whatever you want. You hold on. No, because you just said something is not true.
The law requires that we are allowed to, that elected officials can inspect these facilities, but ICE hasn't let them do that. Why?
Yes.
Why not?
Yes,
if they're following the law, no, they have not.
Yes, they have. Yes,
no, they haven't. This is a continual issue. You can say yes, they have, but it doesn't make you right.
I have some of your talking points here, including one of them that says that you're upset that people who have shown up with medication for their loved ones have not been allowed in. The law is pretty clear. You can show up to prison. I can show up to a prison and demand to see my loved one inside and deliver medicine. They're not going to let me in there either. And if I try to push my way in, I'm going to get arrested. I'm wondering why you all think that because you're protesting ICE, that you somehow have special privileges.
I love how these two totally separate things you just mentioned are completely different. These are families that I have watched who have been told by ICE to bring medication, life-saving medication to their loved ones. It is a processing center, so people aren't supposed to be there for more than 12 hours at a time.
Why do you think that somebody protesting ICE has any more rights than anybody else? If I go stand in front of the FBI office and try to block an FBI agent from leaving, I get arrested. It's pretty simple. Why should those rules not apply to you?
I don't think any of us have more rights than anyone else, but I think we have rights. I think we have the First Amendment, which I thought conservatives liked, but I guess not. Honestly, the reason I'm on this show is to let people know, let people that are watching your show, what is happening. I bring medication, life-saving medication to their loved ones. It is a processing center, so people aren't supposed to be there for more than 12 hours at a time.
Why do you think that somebody protesting ICE has any more rights than anybody else? If I go stand in front of the FBI office and try to block an FBI agent from leaving, I get arrested. It's pretty simple. Why should those rules not apply to you?
I don't think any of us have more rights than anyone else, but I think we have rights. I think we have the First Amendment, which I thought conservatives liked, but I guess not. Honestly, the reason I'm on this show is to let people know, let people that are watching your show, what is happening. I am a 5 foot tall, 110-pound woman who has been thrown by ICE 3 separate times, just existing. One of which I was trying to help someone not get run over by a car.
You weren't just existing. You weren't just existing. You were trying. You weren't just existing. You were trying. You were trying to block. You were trying to block federal agents or assist those who are.
Keep someone from getting
maybe if the person wasn't standing in front of, maybe if the person wasn't standing in front of federal agents, that wouldn't be a problem.
Look, you can talk over me all you want, but I want people to know this is what's happening on the ground, and you have rights.
What's
and I
happening?
know that things that
I'm
we're
still
being
confused.
tear gassed, that people are being taken from their homes. ICE agents repelled from Black Hawk helicopters and arrested naked children in the middle of the night.
No, they didn't. That's been completely debunked. That's been completely debunked.
Literally has not.
So anytime there is any story like this about something that's happened with ICE, for example, them going into this apartment building and detaining all of these people who were citizens. So it wasn't, supposedly Trende Aragua was in the apartment building. And of course, Trende Aragua is the new boogeyman for the right, along with Antifa and trans people and whatever other small group they try to turn into a giant issue in the country. I did a little Googling and tried to find out how many Trende Aragua are in the United States, and it kept coming up. There's no real answer. Nobody knows for sure, but it's probably around 600 people. But ICE goes into an apartment building because supposedly Trende Aragua was there or controlling it, and they detain people, men, women, and children who are citizens. And these guys, these MAGA commentators like Leland Vittert always want to say, oh, that didn't happen. That's been debunked. That's not real. So it's never that ICE did anything wrong. It's always the protesters like Kat Abughazaleh. They're the people who are wrong. Because first and foremost, I don't believe that MAGA and MAGA commentators and pundits like Leland Vittert believe in protest of any kind. They want right-wing policies to be able to be put through without any kind of backlash. Because if you say, when they start talking about, the left did this violent thing, the left did that violent thing, and then you say, okay, what about peaceful protests like athletes kneeling during the national anthem? Well, I'm against that. Well, that's peaceful. That's about as peaceful as it can get. Somebody just quietly kneeling. Well, I'm against that. Because they don't really believe in protest. So they want ICE to be able to go in and do whatever they want. And even the tiniest bit of pushback is viewed as violent against ICE when ICE is being violent against the protesters. And of course, MAGA and Donald Trump are getting what they want. They're going into these cities knowing that there will be protest. They can then squash these protests with violence, which may lead to some actual violence on the side of protesters. And then they can say, see, look, it's the left. They're a bunch of radicals and they're violent. That's the game played from Donald Trump on down to the pundits like Leland Vittert. And Leland Vittert is completely disingenuous.
I watched a little girl be detained. I watched it with my own eyes.
No kids were zip-tied.
I have watched a child be detained with my own eyes.
Okay.
And I get that things are scary out there, but if you're watching this, this will come for you eventually. And it will hurt your loved ones. And we all deserve our rights.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's an important question.
I think you could disagree with me because you are.
I think everybody deserves their rights. But my question is this. Speaking of rights, and just in terms of being interested in what's best for Chicago. I used to live there. I love the city. I met my wife there. And in terms of what is the biggest risk to law-abiding citizens of Chicago, 5 dead, 25 wounded in Chicago in weekend shootings. The ages of victims range from 16 to 62. What's a bigger threat to the citizens of Chicago? The random gang violence and carjackings and shootings, or ICE?
ICE, because let's be clear, if you want to actually attack crime rates, you would do that in red cities where crime is on the rise, not in blue ones where it's going down in a lot of places. Look, I live in Chicago. You don't. I can tell you when conservatives describe Chicago as a war zone, that's first off, nonsense, but the actual war zone is at that processing center where ICE is committing crimes against humanity, where there are dozens of people in a single cell, where
really
grandmothers and pregnant women are sleeping on concrete, and where people
I just say this respectfully. It's a war zone, though, not because people are standing on the sidewalk with signs. It's because you guys are trying to block federal agents.
I watched a group of people praying, and then ICE shot them with pepper balls. They were literally praying on the sidewalk.
Because there was already a riot there.
No, and there has never been a riot there. Okay. When I'm like, you can just say no, but this is what I've experienced. So to the people watching right now, he can say whatever he wants. I have been there, and we deserve better. All of us deserve better, even if Leland doesn't agree.
There we go. Kat, thank you very much. It's why what makes On Balance different, this show different, is we have people on who disagree with us, and we appreciate you being here.
And this is another thing that I love that these disingenuous MAGA hosts like Leland Vittert do. So Kat Abughazaleh, Kat Abu, she is actually there at these protests. She knows what's happening there, and he just keeps saying, nope, that didn't happen. Nope, 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 nope. That's been debunked. Nope. She has been grabbed and thrown down, I think she was talking about one specific incident where ICE guy grabbed her and threw her down really hard, but apparently it's happened like 3 times to her. And she's at these protests, and when she says she wasn't at the protest at the apartment building where he's saying has been debunked, but she said, I have seen a child detained by ICE, and he's just like, okay, whatever, Leland Vittert is. So these are the tactics of MAGA to spread misinformation, spread disinformation, spread propaganda. That's what Leland Vittert does on his show on News Nation all the time. He'll say, I have the dissenting view in somebody like Kat Abughazaleh, and Leland Vittert just talks over her the whole time. And anything Kat Abughazaleh says, Leland Vittert says, that's been debunked. That's not real. That's not true. Then blah, 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 blah. He also pushes back on the idea of crime being down around the country, but maybe up in red cities. So these places like Washington, D.C., that Donald Trump sent the troops into because it's so dangerous and it's a hellhole and it's something out of a Mad Max movie. Reality there was that crime was down like 30%. So again, Leland Vittert has no interest in presenting any facts, presenting any data. He doesn't bring up even a graphic that shows, look, crime is up in Chicago X%, or it's up wherever X%. He just says, that's not true. I don't believe that. That's been debunked. And this is something that I think a lot about. Kat Abughazaleh says, and that's a hard name to say. I hope I'm saying it correctly throughout this. Kat Abu says to Leland Vittert, well, not to Leland Vittert, but to Leland Vittert's audience, which I think is a smart way to do things. She's kind of talking past him and talking to the people who are watching Leland Vittert's show. And maybe some of them can be persuaded, as Kat Abu is saying, hey, they're coming for them now, but it could be you next. And that's where, the famous poem that gets quoted so often from World War II says, first I came for the socialists, but I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't speak out. And on and on. Kat Abu is right that it could be you next. You might say, well, I'm not an immigrant, so who cares about them? Or I'm not a trans person, so who cares about them? But it could be you or your family member at some point. But let me know what you think about all this. Do you agree with Leland Vittert? To me, again, he's another one of just these smug MAGA types that just smirks and makes faces and talks over guests like Kat Abu. Or do you agree with Kat Abughazaleh, what she's saying here, that people, whether you like her or not, she is out there in these protests, so she knows what's happening there. She's seeing what's happening because she's, as they say, on the ground. But do you agree with Kat Abughazaleh, or do you agree with Leland Vittert? Let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. I am Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.